we're going to talk about how to make your deck stand out.
I'm Mia, and I love playing 3 or more colors in my commander decks.
I'm Beezy, and I love when people spell my name correctly in the YouTube comments. And we're the Nitpicking Nerds, and you can join our Patreon if you're looking to spend some money, because you can donate money directly, get some cool stuff in return, and then everybody's happy, including exclusive content.
We're also sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. You can use the code NERDS for 5% off your entire order.
That's a lot of percentages. They're a sponsor of the channel, and we love them, and you can save money while buying cards for yourself at the same time. Dragon Shield has the best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
And you can support us and yourself by buying the best sleeves in the multiverse.
Good sleeves.
On the websites in the description. Also, Mia, do you have anything to say about other sponsors?
Like Moxfield.com? There's going to be an ad somewhere in this video, and you can guess where it is, and if you said you got it right, you lied.
Right. Feel free to guess and be wrong. That's totally normal. Happens all the time. If you say you're right, you are lying.
We don't like liars here.
We don't like liars here. Happy birthday to everyone whose birthdays today, and happy birthday to your pets as well. So this is an interesting video because we talk all the time about strategy and how to make your deck better, or what we think can make your deck worse, or traps to fall into. But this is like, how do I make my deck unique? How do I make everybody walk away from the table having remembered that game? Like, oh, that thing you did was so cool. Like, so we got a bunch of tips, and we're going to start out with one of the ones that's most common to make your deck more interesting, which is
budget. We play a lot of budget decks, and we love building within restrictions. We think it's like a challenge, and it's a reason why you don't have to put in those staples. You don't have to put in Ristic Study if your entire deck budget is $20.
Right. If you start, like with your friends, you could say, if you start a $50 league, or you start a $50 deck challenge that you can play against each other, that is already like a valid reason to exclude Ristic Study. It's hard to say, I'm just not going to play Ristic Study. It's like, well, why? It's like, well, because I don't think it's that fun, but everybody else could still play. But like, even leveling the playing field, or just yourself taking a challenge and saying, I'm going to build a lower power budget deck, $50, $20, $100, whatever, then you start losing things like fetch lands, Ristic Study, Soul Ring, depending on the budget, you can even go. But like Mana Crypt, out of the question. Demonic Tutor, not going to happen. Some of these kind of lamer cards make way for more interesting cards because you got to get scrappy. You got to go like, oh, how am I supposed to flicker creatures if I can only spend 50 cents on a card?
It's synergistic, not just aiming for certain staples that are in most decks, like the EDH Rec Top 100. You're not going to find as many of these in these budget decks. For instance, I have a Yarok deck, and it's a $20 one, so I can't put Conjurer's Closet in unless I want to spend like half the budget on that card.
But to me, like Yarok in general, is like, you say Yarok, the Desecrated, I know exactly what that deck is, but Mia's deck takes a different spin on it in a noticeable way.
I actually love putting in initiative cards. I have some of the ones that you normally would put in Yarok, like your Peregrine Drake or your Coiling Oracle, but I also have like Araconda Sneak?
Yeah, Aarakocra Sneak. Every single like common initiative card, they cost 5 cents. They advance you into the dungeon twice, and now when I play against Mia's deck, I think of she's finishing dungeons and looking at the top 10 for some other dungeon creature, getting further into the dungeon, or putting some giant 7-drop out. It's like, to me, that's much more memorable. And it's not bad. It's not like she's making suboptimal decisions because she's on a budget. So this is some of the best things you can even do on a budget, but it looks way different than an average Yarok deck.
I think budget is also super interesting because when you're in those higher powers without a budget restriction, you are going for those same few cards every time with your tutors, or, you know, if someone's just putting, like, if you have to win by a certain turn, you know that you can't dirtle around and play, like, this slower card. But with the budget, I think it kind of cancels each other out because you know you're not going to win turn 4, 5, maybe even 6 sometimes. So you have the timing to try new things and to be a little bit slower.
Yeah, I think if you take any one of the commonly played, like, not very interesting commanders like Atraxa or Kenrith or Yarok or something like that, and you switch the budget down to 50 or 20 or 30 or whatever, you're going to get a lot. You're going to look at the deck and go, oh, I want to try that. Like, that looks really cool. And people will walk away remembering it more than if you play, no offense to myself, but if you play Yarok and you make Field of the Dead tokens, and then you play like Avenger of Zendikar, it's like, okay. And then Craterhoof, like, oh, wow.
I think this is also a really interesting way to take a deck because it makes you look at your bulk and keep up with certain standard sets or things that are just coming out. Because with Baldur's Gate, there weren't as many chase cards or staples, which is what I used to really look for. Because, you know, everyone knows about Ancient Copper Dragon, you know, super expensive. But I'm looking at these 5-cent cards now if I'm building a $20 budget deck, and I'm going, wow, this is actually really good. It's a little bit more mana than I'm used to paying, but if every game is slower, then I can afford to do that.
Yeah, like now I'm getting excited when they released Rising of the Day and Lord of the Rings 3-mana haste enable. I'm like, oh my god, 15 cents. My deck just got so much better. And it just adds more hype. Let's go to the next one here, which is, we touched on a little bit with budget because it's a form of this, but restrictions. Placing restrictions on a deck and saying, I am going to build a deck, but with this overarching thing. And I'm going to go for an example of my Niv Mizzet Reborn deck. Niv Mizzet Reborn just looks at the top 10 cards and he says, all the multicolored cards that are 2 colors go into your hand, 1 for each guild. And what does he ask of you in terms of like how to build your deck? Nothing, really. You could just put the best cards in Commander in that deck. Some of them will be multicolored, and then he'll draw you 1 or 2 cards when he enters. So he really doesn't ask too much of you, but you can ask something of him. So my thought was, well, he wants multicolored. What if I try to build a deck that can hit the perfect 10 and always draw 1,000,000 cards off of it? So I built the entire deck is multicolored. Every single thing is hittable by Niv Mizzet and is 2 colors multicolored, which just kind of turns the deck from like, oh, snooze fest into like wonky, where I was asking questions of like, how am I supposed to win games? What am I supposed to do for ramp? I'm putting 6 cards of each guild in, so I can't just spam ramp into Simic and Golgari. I need to find some Boros ramp. It makes a deck building way more fun, and people don't know what to expect out of it, and they go, oh, what the heck? And they're like looking over when I do Niv Mizzet triggers. They're like, oh my god, 5 cards, but they're not that good.
I think this is a really funny deck too, because BC's trying to put every duel in it. And in theory, you're like, oh, a 5-color Mayonnaise with every duel in it? That's like pretty boring. That's got to be super high power. It's like, no, I'm just trying to get every single guild in my hand through all these triggers.
Yeah, the deck's like perfectly mana fixed. The deck's like $4,000 for no reason, but the actual cards are like a couple hundred because they're not worth anything. Definitely a great example of like one of my more memorable decks. And I think one thing that Niv Mizzet also does that is not necessary for that deck, but you can do it for other decks, is if you have a theme, but it's trending towards what a companion could do, just throw a companion in your deck, and then you're publicly announcing like, hey, my deck's doing something real weird. Like, I have Umori in the companion zone. You know, all of my cards are creatures.
I think companions are super interesting in Commander too, because you've seen them a lot in certain other types of play, like Draft when March of Machines came out, and you see it when they first came out too, but you see it so rarely in actual Commander. And with the new arts, I mean, what better reason to play them?
Yeah, and so companions is one thing, but it's really just, this is less, it's going to be more nebulous than budget. So it's not like I can say, I'm sticking to $50, but you can make a more nebulous theme and say, every card in my deck is blank. I think that's a good way to start. Like, every card in my deck says draw a card. Every card in my deck has orange artwork. Every card in my deck is part of, like, relates to this movie that I really like. And then you can, like, play that out, and your opponents will just kind of look and go, like, yeah, it is. That's pretty cool.
I think with a companion, too, it adds that extra layer of restriction, so it's easier to build for synergy at that point, because you're like, oh, well, like if BZ did a companion, it's like, oh, everything has to be 2 color. Oh, and everything has to be like 4 mana or above or something. That narrows down the cards that you can play immediately.
Yeah, like with Niv Mizzet, you obviously would like to flicker him because he's an ETB trigger. So you can go, okay, 2 color multicolored spells that flicker Niv Mizzet, and then there's like 12, and you get to pick like your 4 favorites and actually have some synergy still built into the deck without it just being completely wild.
So you adding Yorion?
I probably should. No, I can't. I can't because of the Gigantha companion. Oh. You see, it shares mana symbols, so that double restriction got me. The next one is we're going to say stick heavily to your themes, and I mean like heavily. So this is a quick one, but the example is like Elf Ball. No need to play Cultivate. If you want to build an elf deck, make every card an elf. Make everything an elf that you could possibly make, and it's going to be like, well, BC played that elf deck. There was a lot of elves, as opposed to like, BC played Heritage Druid, Cultivate, and then like Elvish Archdruid.
Yeah, I have a Lathril deck, and we just actually tuned it up, and so we're putting in like Wood Elves, and we're putting in
even like Farhaven Elf, or just all the 1-mana dorks, just turbo elves, so that people can go, shush, you had that out. Like, even for power, it can still be a powerful deck, and people remember it like, oh my god, like that was the all elf deck, like you crushed me with all those elves.
Yeah, you're sticking to your theme though, and in the end, like with Lathril, it makes sense to have those elves. It's not just for synergy, but it's like, oh, I can tap them later to have everyone lose 10 and I gain 10.
Yeah, I think it can make the deck better. Like, if you're playing a creature deck that wants creatures in the graveyard, you should probably see if you can get up to like 40 or 50 creatures. Like, it's going to look weird and you have to cut some good cards, but the deck just is going to hum and churn along in much more of an interesting way, even more of an explosive way. That it makes for more memorable games too.
Yeah, same with Spellslinger decks. You don't want as many creatures in your Spellslinger deck, so if you want to go 40 to 50 spells with that too, it just kind of makes more sense, and it's way more memorable to be like, oh, spell, 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 instead of like a bunch of creatures that kind of just profit off of that in the long run.
Yeah, I just did this with my Balmor deck actually, where I upped it from like 30 spells to like 46 spells. And now it has games where I'm like, all right, I'll deal damage to my opponent's creatures equal to the spells in my graveyard. And they're like, how many spells are in your graveyard? And I'm like, 20. And they're like, what? And it just kind of creates these pop-off moments. I really, really like it.
Yeah, BZ also has those cards that with Delve in it. So it's like, oh, just got to exile a bunch from my graveyard. And then it's like, oh, he has so much in his graveyard.
Yeah. We're like, oh, how many triggers does Balmor have? Like 7? Everyone's like, oh, yeah, we're dead. But in a much less groany way than if it was like Crater Hoof for 20. Everyone's like, okay. It's just like a silent scoop, like whatever.
A cool way to spice up your deck also is to go off the beaten path. I have a Ramos deck, and that's 5 colors, so you could cram in a bunch of good stuff. You could play multicolored spells, but I actually made this Adored in Nothingness deck. That's my main focus. I'm ramping left and right here. I'm trying to play all those multicolored spells so I can get that double Wooburg, trying to get the mana doublers, trying to fix all of my lands to make sure they all tap for the colors I need, and then just either do one or multiple triggers to Door to Nothingness.
Yeah, because even when you, like, because this is a deck that she tells people what she's playing when she sits down. It's like, oh, this is my Door to Nothingness deck. And everyone's like, oh, like, it is? And it's like, then already they're intrigued. But the question obviously is that, like, well, you can Door to Nothingness, but that targets a player. How are you supposed to get the other 2 players when it goes to the graveyard? And, like, that deck is going to answer that question. So even if she wins with it, everyone's like, what? Like, I didn't know that was possible. It was like, it's so much fun. It creates a lot of cool stuff. I think one of the maybe the lessons here of like how to make your deck more interesting is if you start with how you're going to win and you make it very kooky and goofy, and then you just build the deck in the best way to get there, I think that creates a lot more moments than just kind of picking a deck and then picking the best win conditions that you have.
I've also found that picking really weird win cons makes it so that everyone kind of has fun in the game. Or, you know, maybe people underestimate you, but I've never really seen a salty loss with Door because it's just such a hard win con to get off the ground, right? Like I have to
No, I've never seen anyone be salty.
Yeah, and BC's been Doored like 4 or 5 times at this point.
Maybe me. No one else.
But yeah, it's super cool. It definitely adds a lot to flavor, getting it back. It's a challenge to get through. It's so many hoops to jump through. But if you're picking something that's a little bit weird and you're jumping through all those hoops, it feels so much better at the end to be like, yeah, I doored an entire table. What of it?
Yeah, what about it? Then people are going to go remembering those games, which is like one of the big things for how to make your deck stand out.
Moxfield.com.
Oh, you didn't guess this one. It's the best way to build a deck online. And I did say it correctly this time. I love Moxfield. She loves Moxfield. It's the greatest way to build a deck. You need to go on there because if you're not going on there, you're missing out the ability to sort by tags, sort by price, sort by seller, sort by customized category that you like. Shoes, whether they're wearing shoes or not. Do that on Redacted site. I dare you.
You can even make a list with no category, which makes it so much tailorable than any other site, especially Redacted site.
Much more tailorable.
Plus, we have the most followers on Moxfield, and we like to be the first to hit 10,000.
Get on it. You know what to do. This last one I think is actually the biggest point. This is to include mini games in your deck. Now I mean like a mini combo or synergies that's really cool and really interesting to everybody, fun, but not always that involves winning. Just kind of like a game, sort of like an achievement unlocked. So we're gonna just go through a couple of our decks that have like these achievements that make the deck to me more memorable, more interesting to play with or against than normal. So the first one is my Takesies Backsies deck. It's just a bunch of cards. And they're kind of like Taxi, Hateberry. They're kind of like annoying, but I think the way I play the deck is a lot goofier and more memorable, where I just like kind of announce, I'm like, all right, this is my Takesies Backsies deck. If I get you to do a Takesies Backsie, which I will allow, I will declare moral victory on the game. So everyone's like trying to like look at stuff. I'm like, I don't want to get that thing out of there because that can counter a spell.
It doesn't even mean anything in the long run. BZ just gets a little like, well, I got you to take a takesy backseat.
Are you sure you want to do that?
You know, you can. Yeah, however, I know.
Play like this dumb villain character. It's like really goofy. It creates a narrative for the game, though. I'm okay if I'm the bad guy.
Yeah, I've seen that multiple times.
Yeah. The other one I have is one of my like love letters to an old card, Imperial Archangel. It has Shroud, but I built an entire deck because it is my favorite card that I couldn't build with when I was a kid because I didn't know how, but I built an entire deck to enchant a shroud creature. So it's cool for people to see like, wait, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, it's a really weird rule. Auras don't target when they're just entering the battlefield from your hand or the graveyard. So you can just throw them on things and you can't respond. It's really goofy. And it like it feels like it bends the rules a little bit. So it's interesting to like play with.
I think picking a card that's not particularly good or competitive is a super fun way to make your deck. Like the Door, like the Imperial Archangel, those aren't particularly good cards in theory, but as long as you're building the deck so you have fun, I think everyone else will kind of feel that because it's such a challenge.
But also you're weaponizing it. It's like you don't hear Door to Nothingness to you every game. You don't hear attack you for 30 with this bad bulk rare from Alara Reborn or Shards of Alara. You don't hear that. Another one I have that people like to get on my case for, Mono White Field of the Dead, Oketra. It's just an Oketra deck, right? But I basically got to tweak the mana base and have it so that every single game I'm building towards a little sub goal of can I get 7 lands in play that are different names being mono white. And whenever I do it, I always just brag for no reason. Like I go way too hard. I'm like, look who just got their Field of the Dead. Or even if I don't have it, I go, looks like my Field of the Dead is online. How about you guys?
Some people will go up to him too and be like, "Oh, you like Field of the Dead so much? Can you build a one color mana base around Field of the Dead?" Bet you can. He goes, "Well, actually,
yeah, it definitely is a really fun mini like narrative in the game. People were like, "Oh my god, you got it!" And it's like, yeah, I didn't win the game. It doesn't make you salty because the game's not over. It's just a goofy little achievement that I got during the game that makes that game that much more fun.
Plus, like a couple 2/2 zombies never hurt.
Yeah, it never hurt anybody. I take a few blockers. One of my last ones before I go to Mia is to give Dargo Cascade. I just love Dargo, and I love the fact that you can recast him by sacrificing him. So I have a couple cards in the deck that literally just say your commanders have Cascade or your 6-drop has Cascade. So now when I cast Dargo and sacrifice him, I get to just spin the wheel like 6 times, and it's kind of stormy, and it's kind of like, oh shoot, you're probably dead, but it's not in a way people have seen too often.
I love the fact that BZ just spins his wheels so much, and this is just like wheel spinning dot deck.
Yeah, it's just all Cascades. My last one is Brutaclad. I like to pick a weird token or a weird artifact that isn't a token to make tokens of, and then replicate all your tokens into. So like there was a game where I was gonna die, but I'm like, hey, just let me do this one thing, and I made 24 Staffendins, and I'm like, check this out. Everyone was like, that's the coolest thing ever. I didn't know you could, like, that's so awesome. And then I just died, but it was pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's also like somewhat viable. I'm not gonna say it's like you should make Staff of Nin tokens your win con.
It's like 100%. Tier 3.
Yeah, but I have died to Staff of Nin, so I have to respect it at least a little bit.
Yeah, but you have some also. You have some mini games.
Yeah, one of them is I love casting other people's spells. So I love Fevered Suspicion. Anytime that I can get that 8 mana to be like, oh yeah, give me the top, exile a bunch of stuff until I get your spells. Oh, also do it again on rebound. It's not even that good all the time. Sometimes I'll hit like a counter spell.
Or like a Birds of Paradise.
Yeah, or like a ramp spell, and I'm 8 turns in, I'm 10 turns in. Yeah. But every single time I'm like, please don't counter this. This isn't gonna be good. Like, I can promise you it probably won't be good, but I'm so excited to do it. And it's just one of the hallmarks of one of the decks that I love to play.
And then but your excitement also gets other people excited.
Yeah, because it's like, ooh, what are you gonna hit? It's a mystery, you know? I love the little gambles. And I used to have a coin flip deck at one point, but it wasn't that good. And but the entire deck was built around, so
but it's probably still memorable.
Yeah, it was memorable, but at least this is just one card where I'm like, I gotta do the thing.
Yeah, speaking of coin flips.
Oh, Vial Smasher. That's my other mini game that I love to play. So in that same deck, Vial Smasher is the companion, and it's only for the colors for the most part. However, anytime I can kill someone with just the damage that Vial Smasher does, like not combat commander damage, just like, ooh, gonna roll the dice, which opponent will it hit? Oh, you have 4 life, it's gonna hit you. I think it builds the tension of the game. It's like, it's the equivalent of like dying to your own mana crypt.
Yeah, but it's like it creates it every turn where like I've been at 4 with 3 players and I'm just like, not me. And I'm like, yes, it didn't hit me. And it's like, it forces them to get invested kind of.
Yeah, it's not political either. I can't be like, ooh, well, if you do this for me, I guess I don't have to hit you with Vial Slasher. It's like, I'm going to let the dice decide today and we'll figure it out later.
Yes, I think these are all really good ways to make your deck stand out. So try them out. Let us know. Get back to us and say, wow, BZ, wow, Mia, this was the best advice I've ever received. And while you're there, why don't you go check out Etiquette, tips for etiquette. I don't know how old this video is, but here it is.
And always remember.
Yeah, what do we got to remember?
And always remember, please don't counter my door.